Hello everyone, and welcome back to my sunroom here in East Tennessee. Many of you have asked for a Dendrobium update, and they're all spiking right now. And of course, my miniature Solea Champu is in full bloom. She's always the first to bloom in the fall, and the larger Dendrobiums bloom in January or February. My Dendrobiums are in bloom for a long time, and when they're not, I miss seeing their blooms. They're really showstoppers. I grow the Phalaenopsis type of Dendrobiums. The blooms resemble a Phalaenopsis, and that's where they get their name. I don't grow the Nobile type. They require a cool period in the winter that I can't provide for them here. My grow spaces are all warm, much too warm for Dendnobiles. So let's start with the amount of light that these Dendrobiums receive. I have them growing in eastern and western facing windows here in my sunroom. Dens are easy to grow foliage-wise, but they're harder to get to bloom. If they don't get enough light, they'll grow canes and leaves, but no blooms. So I hear from subscribers who say, well, why doesn't this Dendrobium bloom for me? Usually it's the amount of light, or I should say insufficient light, and that is the culprit. If yours isn't blooming for you, then move it to a brighter, sunnier location. Once you find the place that it does well, don't move it. Dendrobiums don't appreciate being moved around very much. I find a good place where they bloom well, and that's where they stay. The next thing I'm asked a lot about Dendrobiums is how I water them. The general growth pattern of the Phalaenopsis type Dendrobiums is that they grow canes. Then once the terminal or the last leaf on that cane grows, then they spike. So during this time, you want to water more and fertilize more. And it's true, especially when they're growing canes, I like to do that. So usually in the spring and summer, I'm watering and fertilizing more, let's say about every 3 days. Then in the fall and the winter, I water about every 5 days, depending on the weather. While they're blooming, I water and fertilize well, but not as often as when they're growing a new cane. They still need the water and fertilizer, but just not quite so often. But when they're growing a new cane, which is an entirely new section of the plant, I fertilize well and often, or the plant will lose more leaves from older growths before it spikes. Losing 1 or 2 leaves isn't a problem, but losing many is an indication that you need to fertilize more and better the next growing season. And many of you have asked me how I fertilize these, and I use the same fertilizer recipe all year long with my orchids. I did a video on my recipe recently, and I'll put that in the description box for you below. When the new canes are growing, they get more fertilizer due to the increase in how frequently I fertilize them, not really the increase in the amount of fertilizer that I use. I just fertilize them more often, in other words. And as for the temperatures back here in my sunroom, in the spring and summer, my sunroom stays between 70 to 82 degrees. And in the fall and winter, it stays between 65 and about 72 degrees here in East Tennessee. I like to keep my humidity in the winter between 35 to 40% with my humidifier. And another question that I receive a lot is, do your Dendrobiums do better in bark or in moss? I have to say my little miniature Dendrobium does better in moss. She does really, really well in moss. I believe that the larger ones do better in the orchiata bark. I have 2 of them still in sphagnum moss, and I believe that the moss stays a little bit too damp for them. and it's easier to control the amount of water and fertilizer they receive in bark. My huge den there in the corner, I nicknamed Wilson, is an example. He's in bark and he is outdoing himself this year. He's got 2 huge spikes that are going to bloom soon. My others that were in moss did okay, but I think that the bark is the best medium for my dendrobiums in my environment. And all of my dendrobiums bloomed this past year except for one, this plum colored den. It grew a beautiful new cane and then it stalled. Remember I told you that they don't like to be moved. I think I moved this one around too much and it just didn't like it. The canes on this den, as you see, they pull forward and it's hard to find it a home. Regular sized dens require a lot of room. So I would move it and it didn't like it, obviously, and it didn't spike for me last year. So about 2 months ago, I watered it and I forgot to drain it. Bad mistake. And then the leaves started to fall and I realized I had left it setting in water and it was in moss. So that's doubly bad. So I drained it and I let it dry out and I repotted it in Orchiata medium-sized bark. And I couldn't decide where to put it in my sunroom. So I just placed it in front of this western-facing window in my dining room. And before I knew it, it was growing a spike. The plant doesn't have many leaves left, but it is spiking. And to say the least, I am surprised that it spiked. The spike is growing well and the roots don't seem to be damaged from the mishap. So that's wonderful. Orchids just always surprise me. And my large orchid there in the corner, like I said, his name is Wilson. He is beautiful and he'll be blooming soon. He is in Orchiata bark and he is so easy to care for. He's huge. What I'm going to do when he grows canes this year, I don't really know. I'd like to put the larger dens in the floor somehow, but I can't put them directly on this marble floor. So I'm going to have to think about how to do that. Both of my Burana Jade Fantasy number 9, those are the ones on the right of the screen. They're doing really well. And again, I want to put them both in bark. They're growing in New Zealand sphagnum. The really tall one that you see there has an unusual spike. I don't know what it's doing, but the spike seems to be short. So hopefully it's going to grow to its usual size. So I'm going to have a lot of pretty dendrobium blooms to share with you soon. I love it when they bloom because the colors are just so vibrant and the blooms last for several months. If I were to add to my collection though, I would definitely choose more of the miniature types. They stay compact. The regular size ones, as you see, I had problem fitting them into my screen on my camera. They grow so huge that I can only have so many here in my sunroom, but they're gorgeous and I really enjoy growing them. That's the thing, grow what you love and what speaks to you, and that's the best way to ensure your growing success. So as I close my video, I'd love to say the blessing over you all and your family. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you his peace. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for your friendship, and we will see you next time.